Shall we play a game?
Today we're going to take all the really good parts out of a PDP-11 23 Plus and put them into a micro PDP-11 83. Then we'll connect it to these dual RL02 drives before we boot UNIX, play Zork, Star Trek, war games, and everything else that you've always wanted to do with a PDP-11. Hey, I'm Dave. Welcome to my shop. Today in Dave's Garage, we're going to build the ultimate old school workstation, a multitasking and multi-user PDP-11 system that would have made you the envy of the computing world back in about 1982. And forget about just booting it up. We're going to max this thing out with more memory than it ever dreamed of having, add a dedicated math box for number crunching, upgrade the CPU, wire in some disk controllers, hook up Ethernet and even multi-user serial ports, and then spin up the classic old MFM hard drives and floppies. By the time we're done, this machine will be running a flavor of UNIX that doesn't just exist in some research lab. It'll be right here, on the bench and on the web for you to play with. Want to play Zork on authentic PDP-11 hardware or take a crack at a Star Trek simulation exactly as it would have felt 40 years ago? Then stick around, this is going to be cool. The PDP-11 has always fascinated me. When I was a kid, I'd ride my pedal bike down to the university's local computer lab on weekends when they would apparently tolerate kids. I managed to get an RSTS/E login, and every Saturday I'd be down there typing away in BASIC, feeling like I had a front row seat to the future. And their PDP-1144 was that future. A genuine big brain machine that made the home computers of the day look like toddlers' toys. Of course, my dream rig would be an 1170. 2 or 3 racks of gleaming deck iron humming away in the shop here, maybe with a helpful magic cat wearing boots that sneaks out at night and fixes the inevitable problems that always crop up. Because as much as I love the idea of an 1170, I also know that I may not be up to the level of technical requirements for the round-the-clock maintenance that it requires. Still, if somebody dropped one off, I would not turn it down. In fact, I would hug it and squeeze it and call it George. Now, a few weeks ago, a viewer named Brett reached out as he was downsizing and had some RL02 disk drives for the Q-Bus models of PDP-11, of which I have a few machines. He was graciously willing to donate them to the channel, but there was just one oddity. Rather than being in a conventional rack or cabinet, they were built into a DEC digital desk. Now, these desks were popular in the 70s and 80s for system administrators or for anybody who had to deal with the drives directly and often. Let's have a look at the day that Brett brought them by. Now, the first thing we did was to unload the DEC digital desk from the back of the truck. But what fun is it without any drives? So let's go into the interior of the truck, where we'll find 2 RL02 drives, or RL02 if you prefer, all nicely packed up and safe for transport. Naturally, we got the drives racked up in the desk. It's a 19-inch standard rack system, and we were able to slide them back in home, nice and safe. Brett was also kind enough to bring by 100 megabytes of portable storage, disk packs including RT11, RSX11, the XXDP diagnostics, and a bunch of scratch packs that I can play with. I set my favorite period-correct VT220 terminal on top of the desk, got it ready to go and powered up. We powered up the drives, we got the heads unparked because they were parked for shipment naturally, which is something you do to mechanically secure the heads so they can't bang around while the drives are being transported. So we've got drives, a desk, a monitor, scratch packs. What do we need? We need a computer. We need a computer to run this whole thing. And so I'm first going to build it in a BA11 chassis, and then we'll port it over to the BA23 chassis when we know everything works and is ready to go. Now is a good time to talk about the difference between Unibus and Q-Bus in the PDP-11. The technical differences between the two aren't that important right now, but in the world of DEC hardware, the distinction between Unibus and Q-Bus serves as a key marker of technological evolution, bridging the gap between DEC's earlier and later PDP-11 models. But what are these buses and why do they matter? Well, let's dive a bit into the history. The Unibus, introduced with the first PDP-11 in 1970, was DEC's pioneering solution to system architecture. It was a 16-bit parallel communications bus that enabled different components, CPU, memory, and peripherals, to exchange data directly. It allowed for direct memory access, or DMA, so that peripherals like a disk controller could take over the bus and write memory directly without needing to get the CPU involved. The Unibus systems, such as the PDP-1134, the 1144, and the flagship 1170, were the cornerstone of DEC's hardware lineup throughout the 1970s. The Unibus architecture allowed for flexibility, enabling a wide variety of peripherals to be connected, making these systems favorites in scientific, industrial, and business applications. However, as integrated circuit technology advanced and cost became a more significant factor, Unibus's limitations, such as its physical size and the relatively high power consumption, started to become apparent. By the late 1970s, DEC engineers sought to create a bus system that was not only more cost-effective but also physically smaller to accommodate the growing demand for compact computing. Enter the Q-bus. The Q-bus, which first appeared with the PDP-1103 in 1975, was a game changer. It retained the 16-bit data width of the Unibus but streamlined the design, reducing the number of signal lines and incorporating multiplexed address and data paths. This reduced the physical size and the complexity of the backplane while lowering costs. Q-bus became the defining feature of DEC's newer systems in the 1980s, such as the PDP-1123, the 1173, and the later micro PDP-11 models. Unlike the Unibus, which required large chassis and extensive cabling, Q-bus could fit into smaller modular enclosures, making them ideal for office environments or embedded applications. This transition also marked the point when DEC began to focus more on single-board CPUs, leveraging advancements in semiconductor technology to deliver powerful computing in compact packages. I'm fortunate to have both Unibus and Q-bus machines. Earlier this year, I snagged an amazing PDP-1134 Unibus system from 1976. It's roughly the size of a fridge, equipped with 3 RK05 disk packs for a total of 5 megabytes online, a floating point board, a cache memory board, and multiple serial ports. The works. It's a time capsule that can run RT11 or RSX11M just as it did in the 70s. But here's the rub. While UNIX originated on a PDP-1120, an even smaller machine, by the time you get to the later versions like BSD-211, you need something bigger and badder. Specifically, you need split instruction and data space so that the OS can stretch out in 128K of memory. And the poor old 1134 can't handle that. It's a bit like trying to run modern Windows on an AMD Athlon. Technically possible with heroic measures, but never comfortable or enjoyable. The RSX11 operating system has been lovingly maintained and upgraded over the years with cool features like TCP/IP support, and that's great. But if you want the authentic multi-user lab machine with at least the modern flavor of Unix, you need more oomph. You need something like the 1170 or its younger cousins, which, as you know, I do not have, at least not in the big rack flavor. What I do have is an 1173, a Q-bus micro PDP 1173 to be precise. It's a formidable workstation from the 1980s that could handle multiple users simultaneously. Connect up to 9 people locally with serial cables and let more log in over telnet on the network, and you've got a tiny time-shared universe right at your desk. Back then, the idea that multiple people could share one desktop system concurrently was revolutionary. Think of it as a direct ancestor of today's cloud computing, only at a fraction of the speed and thousands of times the fuss and work. Everything we do in the shop today will be Q-bus. My first step is going to be to harvest the very best parts from the various Q-bus machines I have and assemble them all in the big 1173. But as a first test, I'm going to try the controller in a BA11 chassis as it's easier to work with. And once I know the controller works, we'll start transferring all the things to the tower. Let's have a look at putting the system together. Here I've got a system that began its life as a PDP-1123 Plus in a BA11 housing. Right now it's sporting an 1183 CPU and 2 megabytes of PMI memory, so it's quite an upgrade. Our task now is to install the disk controller and optionally a Unibone controller so that we can get virtual drives mounted and see what operating systems we can bring up. Of course, putting in the card does you no good if you don't connect it to the drives, and so here the proprietary connector goes to a ribbon cable, and the ribbon cable goes to the third card in here, which is the disk drive controller that I just installed. And now that I know that the components all work together, what I'm going to do is pull 4 RAM boards out of the big BA23 tower because there just aren't enough slots in the machine to accommodate all the cards that we want to have in it. I'm going to build a best of, which is all the best cards in one machine. So to do that, I'm going to first pull 4 512K RAM boards out of it, which I've numbered and set aside here. We'll put those in the smaller BA11 chassis as a spare machine, and we'll move all the good parts to the big BA23 tower. When we're done, both machines will still have 2 megabytes, but one will have 4 cards and one will just have 1 card. And so this smaller system is known as the BA11. It comes with a case, and then it has rails that go on the side, and it's generally rack mount. The big tower is a BA23 tower. The internal guts can also be rack mounted sideways, but I actually prefer it in this big tower. It's going to go really well in the desk next to the RL02 drives. Right now, though, it's cable management time with ribbon cables. My favorite. Here's the back of the tower with the access panel open. You can see there are currently 4 cards installed. That's going to be memory, CPU, disk controller, and serial. In this case, unlike most machines, the RAM board actually goes at the very top slot and the CPU sits in below it. That allows that memory to run as a PMI configuration instead of having to be accessed over the Q-bus. It's about a 20% optimization in execution speed on my prime CIF, so it's a worthwhile thing to do. Now to complete my 2 meg swap between the machines, I'll install the 4 boards that we pulled out of the big tower here into the smaller BA11. Each one is individually wire wrapped on little posts to indicate where its starting address is, its CSR address, and so on. All of that allows you to set the base address of the memory module so that they don't overlap. It's certainly not plug and play. It's not a case of add more and it just shows up. You have to do some tuning. And so while they're both 2 megabyte machines, the BA11 housing sports a 15 megahertz CPU, while the big BA23 has an 18 megahertz CPU and a floating point unit for mathematical computation. The system also features a dual floppy RX50 up front. Internally, it's got an MFM controller that we have to put in, and that connects to an MFM drive. It's also got an Ethernet controller and an 8-port serial port that we'll put in now. Now, all of the I/O goes to the back of the machine. There are going to be a total of 9 serial ports, 1 UBI Ethernet port, and now we have to figure out some way to mount up this rather custom controller. It looks like we've got an actual panel that mounts to the system, and it goes to a standard deck knockout, and so we'll mount our cable in that location. And once I've got it mounted, here you can see the deck drive bus cable. This is the interface, and it goes to each drive, and then each drive ends finally with a terminator. Once I've got the cable plugged in, you can see that it's a pretty tidy connection. Everything else will now go back together, and we should have a working machine if all has gone well. And once I close up the access panel and screw it shut, you can see this looks completely unlike any modern PC, other than maybe you might recognize these as being serial ports. Other than that, there's not a lot that is familiar today. We've got the drive bus cable and we've got our Ethernet controller, and those are our 2 main connections to the world. Storage-wise, this 1173 is sporting an internal Seagate ST225 MFM drive for booting RT11. But we want UNIX, and that's where the Cubone from Retro CMP steps in. It's a QBus card that plugs right into the machine's bus, introducing virtual devices off its internal SD card. Think of it like an SD to SCSI adapter on steroids. Suddenly we can load up disk images as if they were spinning platters inside our PDP. It even simulates the RPM spin-up of the drive and the whole works. It's a 21st century lifeline to a 20th century masterpiece. And then there's a dual floppy drive, a pretty cool piece of equipment. I've got it running under RT11 and RSX11M, but getting the RX50 floppy to talk nicely to 211 BSD UNIX has been challenging. If any of you DEC or BSD aficionados out there know the secret handshake, please reach out in the comments. It's part of the charm of these old systems. Half the joy is the detective work, scouring old manuals, fiddling with jumpers, talking online, and learning the quirks that made these machines legendary in their day. At the end of all this, once we've got UNIX running nicely, I'm putting this beast on the web for you to try. Because this isn't just about me reliving my youth, it's about sharing that experience. You'll be able to telnet in, poke around the file system, fire up Zork, and see what multi-user really meant before every household even had a PC. I want to capture that sense of wonder I felt as a kid sneaking into the university lab. Today the lab is here in my garage. The terminals are your browsers, and the PDP-11 is ready to show you how it's done old school style. Next, to really nail that authentic early 80s vibe, I added a VT220 terminal. The VT220 is a genuine DEC terminal, crisp green characters on a black background, sturdy and reliable. With it on top of the system desk, the entire setup looked like I had just stepped through a time warp and straight into a university's computing lab. To get the RL02 drives talking to the PDP, as you saw, I installed the RLV12 controller that Brett had generously included with the donation. The RLV12 is what bridges the gap between the QBus machine and those big, beautiful RL02 disk packs. But early attempts revealed a snag. Both drives came up with their fault lights on. Now that's not entirely surprising. These are old drives, and old drives can be fickle. I tried swapping cartridges and got one of them ready to go, but the other one remained stubborn. And then about 30 minutes later, when I just walked by again, I noticed the drive's light had gone on and it said ready. It had just mysteriously illuminated. Perfect. My guess is that the lubrication and the old bearings needed a bit of a workout. After a brief warm-up session, it decided to cooperate. Hey, sometimes you got to shake off the cobwebs, because these machines are mechanical marvels as much as they're electronic. With the drive settled down, I prepared the Cubone card. The Cubone, as I said, is the modern QBus card that lets me mount SD card images as if they were real disks on the PDP. I planned to slot it in last, fitting it into the cage so that I'd have an ideal combination of both original and modern storage options. There's something wonderfully symmetrical about having RL02 cartridges humming along an SD card. Huge 10 megabyte removable packs next to gigabytes on a fingernail-sized chip. It got even better. With the cabinet kit for the RL02 drives, I could route the cable neatly. Instead of just threading the cable through a random hole in the case, I had an official connector panel on the back. That was standard DEC practice. Practicality, tidiness, and elegance, even 40 years ago. Of course, after that bit of hardware Tetris, I was faced with a jungle of ribbon cables. The RLV12 cables, the Ethernet controller, the Cubone wiring, the MFM drive connections, the multiple cables to the serial ports, and the tape interface. Ribbons everywhere, each with their own quirks and places to go, and red is not always pin 0 on these things. Carefully combing them through the chassis, routing them around boards, and making sure they didn't interfere with each other was a bit of a chore. But cable management is always worth the effort. Once done, the inside looked neat and orderly, improving airflow and ensuring there'd be fewer gremlins to chase down later. Standing back and looking at the setup, I could hardly believe how it was shaping up. A micro PDP-1173, now powered by a lightning fast, for the day, 2 megabyte PMI memory board connected to RL02 drives via a proper RLV12 controller, sporting Ethernet, MFM drives, a Cubone interface for SD card storage, and more. A beautiful VT220 terminal perched on top. All of it looking like something right out of a top-tier computing facility from the early 80s. Only this time it's right here, resurrected in my shop. And the best part is that we're only steps away from firing it up and running a proper UNIX environment on this machine, just as if we had a time machine and a DEC sales rep on speed dial. We're getting close. So next up, firing everything up, testing out the drives, and hopefully booting it into BSD 211 UNIX. Now when you first power on 1173 or 1183, you get this memory test, which I've actually set to the fast mode because with 2 or 4 megs of memory, the test can take quite some time. You can see it's already booted into the XXDP Plus monitor off of the disk pack. Do it directly to the disk pack, and it's got so many files on it that it won't even finish listing before the Cubone resets it and boots it back into UNIX. Once the system is successfully reset, it's going to prompt us to boot from the MFM drive that it's got virtualized. That's on RA100. And we can see that RA0 is going to be 311,000 blocks. We can see QE0 is our Ethernet card, and it's apparently there and present. That's our MAC address there. If you want to hack me, please don't. And up near the top of the screen there, you can see our physical memory was 4 megabytes, and we had about 3.8 of that free. Now everything is spooling up, and I have sped some of this up, or at least eliminated delays in between things like starting send mail and all the other demons or daemons. We'll get around here to log in as root, no password. We'll do a listing of the root, and it looks just kind of like you're used to Unix looking. Now we want to format the scratch pack that I've inserted into the drive, and that's a lot easier if it's got the format script, which this machine does not. So we've got to apply a label to it before we can actually do anything with it. Right now the label is blank, and so I won't be able to mount it. At least I'll try here. But when I do, I'm getting largely garbage because I believe the entry in the disk tab is not correct for this drive. And so I'm going to try wiping the initial sectors of the drive, but ultimately we're going to have to go in and edit the disk tab. I'm going to edit and change the configuration for the RL02 drive to reflect what I know to be its physical characteristics, and we'll do it with a single partition, and then we'll just put in OC0 here at the end for a null partition at the end. We'll delete this next line as unneeded, save it back out, relist the file to make sure it looks correct, which it does, so we can save it and exit. And now with the geometry correct, I should be able to read and then rewrite the disk label, just updating the label itself. But no, alas, it's not that simple. So I'm probably going to have to edit the entire disk label manually, which I can do with a -E flag. Let's see. There's the current disk label. Should work. It just says unknown, but I'm going to mount it. No, you can see it's not happy, so we'll unmount it. We'll do the edit of the disk label. I'll go ahead and put it a name here, maybe scratch pack. Everything else looks right at this point. So if we save it, I should then be able to format it with new FS. Sure enough, here it goes. I'll get the pack mounted, and then we'll do a listing. We can see it's actually got lost and found. So I'll go in there, and I'll touch a file to create it, do a listing, and there's my new file that I just created. The disk pack is working well. And so as a big test, I want to copy all the games from the games folder onto the removable cartridge in RL1. So I'll do that, and we'll go take a look at the machine and see what's actually happening. And the drive is actually very busy based on the ready light, so it looks like the copy is working well. I'll take a listing of the new cartridge. Looks like everything is there. Zork is not a folder, it's an executable, so I will run it. And we don't need to play it right now, I just want to make sure it all worked. And as soon as I can figure out how to exit Zork, is it quit? Is it buy? Oh no, it's quit. Yes, I want to leave. Now we can try War Games.
Shall we play a game?
Funny, the only way to win is not to play at all. Yes, we've seen the movie. Pretty clever. And in honor of Usagi Electric, I'm going to run banner here, and I'm going to have it print out Hello World. Now, this would be a lot more fun if I had a decorator and we could watch it print out a huge banner on the wide paper, but we'll have to make do with the screen scrolling by here. I guess I could send it to my wife's laser printer, but it's always out of magenta toner. And for the curious, here's a list of other games that come pre-installed on 2.11 BSD. By now you've got a sense of the flavor of the system, but why not take it for a drive yourself? I'm going to set it up on the web and let you folks have at it. All you need to do is to telnet to PDP-1173.com and you're in. Yes, PDP-1173.com is my PDP-1173. You won't even need a password. And so I do have one favor to ask, and that's to be nice. It's incredibly easy for a malicious individual to trash a machine that hasn't had a security update in more than 40 years. So if you do know how you'd ruin the party for everybody else, maybe just leave a text file describing it instead of actually doing it. Now remember, with 800,000 subscribers and 8 serial ports, it might be a challenge to connect, and things could be a tad slow, but that's going to be part of the fun. Give it a shot from time to time and let me know in the comments if you got in and how it went. If you found today's PDP-11 adventure to be any combination of interesting or entertaining, remember I'm mostly in this for the subs and likes, so I'd be honored if you consider subscribing to my channel and leaving a like on this video before you go today. And if you're already subscribed, thank you. Please consider turning on the notification bell. Check out the free sample of my book on Amazon, link in the video description. It's everything I know now about living your best life on the spectrum that I wish I'd known long ago. Thanks for joining me out here in the shop today. In the meantime and in between time, I hope to see you next time, right here in Dave's Garage. This little chair will be waiting for one of you, and a rocking chair for another who likes to rock, and a big armchair for two to curl up in. All next time on Dave's Garage.